Captain Jackson Viro had seen a lot of bizarre things in his time, but stepping into an alien temple dedicated to a colossal wormhole was a first, even for him. As he stepped into the dimly lit chamber, he couldn't help but feel like he'd walked into the punchline of the universe's cruelest joke. "Look at this," he muttered to himself, taking in the intricate carvings and mysterious symbols etched into the walls. "I'm in a cosmic cathedral dedicated to a giant interstellar toilet." The temple was as silent as a librarian's graveyard shift, with the kind of eerie stillness that made you wonder if you should have packed an extra pair of underpants. Viro flicked on his flashlight, casting a beam across the chamber's ancient stone. The light danced across the walls, illuminating more of the alien hieroglyphs that he couldn't read and frankly didn't care to. "Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and assume that none of this says welcome. Please don't touch anything," he said, smirking at his own wit. Jackson Viro was many things: charismatic, roguish, the type of person who could charm the teeth out of a pissed-off crocodile. But careful, not so much. "They say curiosity killed the cat," he mused, stepping further into the temple. But satisfaction brought him back, which is just a fancy way of saying someone couldn't leave well enough alone. Guess I'm about to find out if I get satisfaction or just a death certificate. The temple's main attraction, a colossal wormhole swirling like a cosmic drain, dominated the room. It was both mesmerizing and terrifying, like watching a star go supernova on a distant news channel, safe and yet unsettling. "Well, aren't you a beauty?" Viro said to the wormhole, as if flirting with a deadly black hole was a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Just as Viro was admiring the swirling spectacle, a voice crackled over the intercom in his helmet. It was Kira, his ever-sarcastic and eternally worried engineer back on the ship. "Viro, you better not be touching anything down there," she warned, her voice a mix of exasperation and genuine concern. "You remember what happened last time you got curious, right? I'm still finding pieces from that explosion." "Relax, Kira," Viro replied, waving a dismissive hand even though she couldn't see it. "I'm just admiring the view. It's not every day you stumble upon an alien wormhole temple. Every day you live is a day you shouldn't tempt fate," Kira snapped back. "Because one day, fate's gonna take you up on that offer and I'll be left picking up the pieces." "Yeah, well, if I don't come back, think of it as a long overdue vacation," Viro joked, glancing around to ensure he was alone. It wasn't like the Cowrians had posted a guard. They probably thought their temple was so sacred, no one would dare go near it. Typical alien arrogance. The Cowrians, a race known for their excessive security measures and the kind of paranoia that could drive a conspiracy theorist insane, had built this temple as a gateway to the entire galaxy. It was like a cosmic peephole, and they weren't exactly thrilled about sharing it. But Viro had always been the kind of guy who couldn't resist poking his nose where it didn't belong. As he wandered closer to the wormhole, he couldn't help but notice a series of controls embedded into the floor. "Ooh, buttons," Viro said, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. He crouched down, peering at the alien symbols that adorned the panel. "Let's see if any of this looks like don't press." Kira's voice came through again, more urgent this time. "Viro, do not, under any circumstances, press anything. I'll be up to my elbows in paperwork if you trigger some ancient defense mechanism." "Live a little, Kira," Viro teased, his finger hovering above a particularly enticing button. "What's the worst that could happen?" "You mean besides dying in a spectacularly stupid fashion?" Kira shot back. "Just be careful, all right." Viro chuckled and against better judgment pressed the button. He felt a satisfying click beneath his finger, followed by a low hum that vibrated through the floor. "Well, that was anticlimactic," he said, standing back to admire his handiwork. A moment later, the temple's dim lighting flickered to life, bathing the room in an eerie glow. The wormhole pulsed with a new intensity, like a sleeping giant waking up from a long nap. "Okay, maybe not so anticlimactic," Viro admitted, scratching his head. Before he could ponder the consequences of his actions, the entire temple shuddered, and a series of mechanical whirs echoed through the chamber. "Viro, what did you do?" Kira's voice was practically a scream now, crackling with static. I might have activated something," Viro replied, backing away from the panel. "You know, hypothetically speaking." The floor beneath him split open, and from the depths emerged a series of robotic sentinels, their sleek metallic forms glinting in the newfound light. They didn't look friendly. "Oh, crap," Viro muttered, feeling all the bravado drain from him like a punctured balloon. "Viro, get out of there," Kira shouted, her voice barely audible over the rising din of the temple's defenses. "Great advice, Kira," Viro said, turning on his heel and sprinting for the exit. "I'll leave you a good review on Galactic Yelp if I survive." The sentinels sprang to life, their weapons trained on Viro as they advanced with the kind of relentless determination only a mindless machine could muster. Viro zigzagged through the temple, dodging energy blasts that scorched the ancient stone around him. "This is not how I wanted to die," he grumbled, narrowly avoiding a shot that would have taken his head off. As he bolted for the exit, he couldn't help but think about how terribly this would look on his tombstone. "Here lies Jackson Viro. He messed with the wrong wormhole. Should have brought a map," he muttered breathlessly, skidding around a corner. "Viro, where are you?" Kira's voice was frantic now, the static louder than ever. "Trying not to become a piece of Swiss cheese," Viro replied, his lungs burning from exertion. "If you could send down a rescue team, now would be an opportune moment." "Just hold on," Kira urged, her voice cutting in and out. "I'm working on it." Viro didn't have the luxury of waiting. He needed to reach the exit before the sentinels turned him into a smoking crater. "I've got a date with Destiny, and she doesn't like being stood up," he quipped, pushing himself to run faster. The exit loomed ahead just a few meters away. Freedom, sweet freedom, was almost within reach. But as Viro dashed towards it, one of the sentinels fired a well-aimed shot that struck his leg, sending him sprawling to the ground. "Son of a," he cursed, clutching his leg in pain. "That's gonna leave a mark." "Viro, what's happening?" Kira's voice was filled with panic, and Viro could barely hear her over the temple's alarms. "Just a minor setback," Viro grunted, dragging himself towards the exit with grim determination. "Nothing I can't handle." The sentinels closed in, their weapons poised to finish the job. Viro's mind raced, searching for a way out of this literal death trap. And then, like a miracle, or perhaps just blind luck, he spotted a loose rock within arm's reach. "All right, let's see if this works," Viro muttered, grabbing the rock and hurling it with all his might at the control panel. The rock hit its mark, shattering the panel in a shower of sparks. The sentinels froze, their systems momentarily confused by the sudden disruption. Viro used the opportunity to drag himself out of the temple, collapsing onto the ground outside with a pained groan. "Viro," Kira's relieved voice crackled in his ear. "Are you all right?" "Never better," he replied with a weary chuckle, lying flat on his back and staring up at the sky. "Just took a little detour through hell and back. No big deal." "I'm sending a medical team down," Kira said urgently. "Just hang in there." Viro sighed, closing his eyes and letting exhaustion wash over him. Yeah, he mumbled. "Tell them to bring a stiff drink while they are at it." As he lay there, he couldn't help but think that this had all started because he couldn't resist pressing a button. Curiosity had indeed killed the cat, but as Viro lay there, alive and slightly worse for wear, he figured that satisfaction might just bring him back yet again. And as the sound of distant footsteps approached, Viro couldn't help but grin. After all, it wasn't every day you pissed off an entire alien race and lived to brag about it. But for Jackson Viro, it was just another day in the life of a human explorer who never knew when to quit. Jackson Viro lay on his back, contemplating the sky, a constellation of bruises forming on his leg as the pain settled in. An alien temple had tried to kill him, and now he was waiting for a medical team and a drink, preferably in that order. This wasn't your average Tuesday, but for Viro it was close enough. Meanwhile, aboard the Calrian mothership, Chaos was brewing like a pot of particularly rancid coffee. High Priestess Zainara, the kind of leader who could make even bureaucrats seem spontaneous, was less than thrilled. "Explain to me," she demanded, her voice sweetened with the kind of underlying threat that made people suddenly remember they had urgent appointments elsewhere. "What exactly happened in our sacred temple?" Her subordinates, a nervous bunch of Cowrians who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, exchanged glances. Finally, one stepped forward, his name unimportant and his courage clearly misplaced. "A human, my priestess. He activated the wormhole." Zainara felt her eye twitch, a condition that usually only flared up during diplomatic negotiations or when someone mentioned her mother-in-law. "A human," she repeated, letting the words hang in the air like a particularly unpleasant odor. "You mean to tell me that one of those unpredictable, reckless primates managed to breach our most secure site?" The Cowrian nodded, his antennae drooping in a way that suggested he'd rather be a million light-years away. "Yes, High Priestess. It appears he pressed the button." The room went silent, the kind of silence that usually preceded a violent explosion or an awkward dinner party. "Of course he did," Zainara muttered, rubbing her temples. "Humans. Give them a button and they'll press it. Give them two and they'll start a war." She turned her gaze to the view screen displaying a live feed of Viro sprawled outside the temple. "What do we know about this particular human?" Another assistant, with all the enthusiasm of a condemned man, stepped forward. "His name is Jackson Viro, a known explorer and troublemaker. He's been described as charismatic and roguish by his peers and a pain in the ass by everyone else." Zainara couldn't help but chuckle, though it was a sound devoid of humor. "Charismatic and roguish. Wonderful. Exactly what we need, a space pirate poet." She paused, contemplating the implications. This could be seen as an act of war. The mention of war made everyone in the room shift uncomfortably. The Cowrians weren't exactly known for their combat prowess. Their preferred method of conflict resolution usually involved long-winded debates and passive-aggressive memos. Back on the ground, Viro was starting to feel like someone had wrung him out and hung him up to dry. The distant whir of approaching engines signaled the arrival of Kira's medical team, but with his luck, they'd probably be attending to his funeral instead. As he lay there, his helmet's comm crackled back to life. "Viro, you still with us?" Kira's voice was a lifeline in a sea of chaos. "Barely," Viro replied, wincing as he shifted his weight. "I think I've made some new friends. You know, the kind that want to kill you with extreme prejudice. Well, you're just a hit with everyone, aren't you?" Kira's sarcasm was as comforting as a warm blanket. "You better hope they don't decide to play Blast the Human down there." "Already did," Viro wheezed, glancing at his leg. "Turns out I'm not a fan of the game. Needs better rules." As the medical team landed and scrambled to his side, Viro's surroundings began to blur into a haze of pain and adrenaline. Through the fog, he noticed a Cowrian vessel descending, its sleek, imposing form like a cosmic vulture circling a dying star. The Cowrians weren't about to let this incident slide. High Priestess Zainara had dispatched a diplomatic envoy, or what passed for one, with orders to apprehend Viro and bring him before the Cowrian Council. As far as diplomatic gestures went, this was less olive branch and more spiked club. Viro found himself being unceremoniously loaded onto a stretcher, the medics muttering about fracture risks and plasma burns. But before they could whisk him away, a squad of Cowrian soldiers descended, their movements precise and efficient, like clockwork robots programmed to ruin your day. "Hey, I'm flattered by all the attention, guys," Viro said, trying to inject some levity into the situation as the soldiers surrounded him. "But you could have just sent a fruit basket." One of the soldiers, clearly not amused, gestured for Viro to be handed over. "By the order of High Priestess Zainara, you are to be taken into custody for breaching sacred Cowrian grounds and activating the wormhole." Viro sighed, feeling the weight of their suspicion more than the pain in his leg. "Look, it was an accident," he tried to explain, though he could already tell it was like arguing with a black hole. I pressed a button. It's like breathing for humans, automatic, often regrettable. The soldiers weren't buying it, and Viro found himself being escorted, or rather dragged, toward the Caurian vessel. The medics protested, but their voices were drowned out by the hum of the ship's engines firing up. As he was hauled inside, Viro's comm sputtered with static. "Viro, what's happening?" Kira's voice, usually the personification of calm cynicism, was tinged with genuine worry. "I'm being abducted by aliens." "Again," Viro replied, trying to keep his tone light despite the circumstances. "Tell my plants I love them. Can't you ever just stick to the plan?" Kira lamented. "I told you not to press anything." "In my defense, it was a very tempting button," Viro quipped as he was unceremoniously strapped into a seat within the Caurian ship, his leg throbbing with each movement. The vessel lifted off, leaving behind the temple and the wreckage of Viro's latest escapade. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, the Caurians eyeing him like he was some sort of unpredictable, volatile element. Which, in fairness, he was. High Priestess Zainara awaited in the council chamber, her expression a mask of barely concealed irritation. When Viro was brought before her, he offered his best smile, the kind that usually won over barmaids and diffused tense standoffs. "Usually." "Jackson Viro," Zainara began, her voice a silky blend of authority and exasperation. "You have trespassed on sacred ground and activated a device of immense power. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Viro shrugged, trying to look as non-threatening as a man could while handcuffed to two guards. "I wanted to press a button. Turns out it was a mistake, like ordering seafood on a desert planet." Zainara's eyes narrowed, her patience clearly wearing thin. "This is a serious matter. The wormhole is a relic of our ancestors, not a toy for your amusement." "Trust me, if I'd known what it did, I would have thought twice," Viro replied, his tone flippant but his mind racing with calculations. "Tell me, does this kind of thing happen often around here, or am I just special?" The Caurians exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to interpret Viro's brand of humor. Zainara, however, was not amused. "You have jeopardized the safety of our people and risked an intergalactic incident. This is no laughing matter, human." "Look," Viro said, trying to sound sincere. "I get it, you're mad and you have every right to be, but I swear I'm not here to cause trouble. Trouble just finds me." Zainara considered him for a moment, her gaze piercing. "You will be held until we can determine the full extent of the damage you have caused." Viro sighed, resigning himself to his fate. "Fine, but can I at least get a drink while I'm being interrogated? It's been a long day." The Caurians were unimpressed, but one of the guards took pity on him, producing a small flask. Viro took it with a grateful nod, savoring the burn of alien whiskey as it went down. "You humans," Zainara said, shaking her head slightly, "always making light of serious situations." "It's a coping mechanism," Viro replied, leaning back as much as his restraints would allow. "We laugh because the alternative is crying and nobody wants to see a grown man sobbing in the corner." Bad for morale. As the council deliberated on what to do with him, Viro couldn't help but reflect on his predicament. Here he was, caught in the middle of yet another cosmic misunderstanding, and all because he couldn't resist pushing a button. Typical. But beneath the humor and bravado, he knew he was in deep trouble. The Caurians weren't just scared, they were angry, and they had every reason to be. Viro had a knack for getting out of tight spots, but this one was proving particularly challenging. Whatever happened next, he would have to think fast, talk faster, and maybe, just maybe, avoid pressing any more buttons. Easier said than done, of course. But then, Jackson Viro had never been one to take the easy road. As he sat there, waiting for the Caurians to decide his fate, Viro couldn't help but wonder if his curiosity would be the death of him one day. Today wasn't that day, but as the saying went, there was always tomorrow. And if there was one thing he had learned in his travels, it was that tomorrow always brought new adventures and new buttons to press. Jackson Viro sat in his holding cell with the enthusiasm of a cat in a bath. The Cowrians had designed the room with all the warmth and charm of a tax audit: gray walls, a single bench, and a light that hummed menacingly overhead. It was like they'd taken a crash course in human discomfort and passed with flying colors. He leaned back, trying to ignore the throb in his leg, and tapped his thumb against the metal bench. "Well, Jackson," he muttered to himself, "you've really outdone yourself this time." Button pressing extraordinaire. The cell door hissed open, and in walked a Cowrian with an air of bureaucratic displeasure. This one wasn't wearing any ceremonial garb, just a plain uniform that screamed "I hate my job" in every known language. "Jackson Viro," he began, as if reading from a script, "you are hereby detained for your actions concerning the wormhole." "Lovely to meet you too," Viro replied, flashing a grin as charming as a rusty nail. "I'd offer you a seat, but it looks like the interior decorator was going for prison chic." The Cowrian ignored him, proceeding with his monologue. "Your actions have disrupted a crucial surveillance network. The wormhole is not merely a relic, it's a cornerstone of our galactic communication system." Viro raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "So, what you're saying is, without your cosmic donut, you're flying blind." "Yes," the Cowrian replied, devoid of any humor, "and we are not pleased." Viro smirked. "Join the club." "I'm not exactly winning any popularity contests myself," the Cowrian continued, unfazed by Viro's sarcasm. "High Priestess Zainara will see you after the council convenes. Until then, I suggest you reflect on the gravity of your actions." "Gravity?" Viro chuckled, gesturing around the cell. I'm reflecting." "You got a mirror in here." With a sigh that could have powered a small starship, the Cowrian left, the door hissing shut behind him. Viro was alone again, left to contemplate the universe and the remarkable stupidity of his own curiosity. The idea of his impulsive button pushing having far-reaching consequences wasn't exactly new. But learning that he'd disrupted an entire surveillance network put a new spin on his predicament. It was as though he'd stumbled into a wasp's nest and then wondered why everything was buzzing angrily. The wormhole, he realized, wasn't just a door to somewhere else. It was a window, one the Cowrians relied on to keep the perceived chaos of the galaxy at bay. And here he was, the human wrench in their well-oiled machine. It was ironic, really. Humans were considered unpredictable by the Cowrians, a species who, by all accounts, were the intergalactic equivalent of hall monitors. Viro had crashed their orderly party, spilled the punch, and now they were scrambling to make sense of it all. His thoughts were interrupted when the door opened again, and to his surprise, it wasn't another Cowrian drone with a clipboard. Instead, a curious-looking Cowrian entered, her eyes wide with the kind of interest usually reserved for new species at the zoo. "Jackson Viro," she said, her voice tinged with something akin to fascination. "I've heard much about you." "Well, I'm flattered," Viro replied, flashing his trademark grin. "You must be the entertainment." She tilted her head, antennae twitching in a way that suggested she might actually be enjoying this. "I wanted to meet the human who caused so much disruption." "That's me," Viro said, feigning a bow as best as his restraints would allow. "Jackson Viro, professional chaos enthusiast," the Cowrian chuckled, a sound that was surprisingly pleasant. "I am Tiala. I study human behavior, and you are quite the subject." "Glad to be of service," Viro replied, eyeing her with curiosity. "So, what's the verdict?" "Are we all as charming as me?" Tiala smiled, a subtle expression by Cowrian standards. "Not quite, but your adaptability is remarkable. You see opportunities where others see roadblocks. Or where others see, giant warning signs," Viro quipped, leaning back against the cold wall. "You must think we're either brilliant or bonkers." "Both," Tiala admitted, her gaze thoughtful. "Your kind's unpredictability is interesting. It challenges our perception of order." "Glad to shake things up a little," Viro said, his tone light despite the heavy implications. "But seriously, how bad did I mess things up with the wormhole?" Tiala sighed, her antennae drooping slightly. "The wormhole is a vital part of our monitoring system. Without it, our communication lines are vulnerable." Viro considered this, the wheels in his mind turning. So you're saying I've done more than just annoy a few diplomats. I've thrown a spanner in the works of your entire network. Precisely, she replied, her expression one of grudging respect. And now the council must decide how to handle this. Anomaly. Anomaly, huh? Viro mused, rubbing his chin. I've been called worse. Tiala remained silent for a moment, her gaze fixed on Viro as if trying to decipher a particularly complex puzzle. What do you think will happen? He met her gaze, his smirk fading into something more contemplative. Honestly, I'm not sure, but I do know I'm not going down without a fight, or, at the very least, a sarcastic remark. Tiala nodded, her expression thoughtful. I believe you, Viro chuckled, though it was a sound without much humor. You're one of the first. Most people tend to bet against the house. Perhaps the council will see things differently, she said, her tone hopeful. After all, change can be beneficial. Tell that to High Priestess Zainara, Viro replied with a wry grin. I think she'd sooner toss me out of an airlock. Tiala gave a small smile before standing up. I should go, but it was enlightening to speak with you. Likewise, Tiala, Viro said, watching her leave. The door slid shut behind her, leaving him alone once more with his thoughts and the specter of his rapidly approaching fate. The more he considered his situation, the more he realized that maybe, just maybe, the Cowrians were as intrigued by him as he was by them. Sure, they had him locked up like a prized exhibit, but they hadn't tossed him into a black hole yet. And if there was one thing Viro knew how to do, it was talk. Talk and convince people that he wasn't the harbinger of doom they thought he was. Sure, he'd messed up, but making errors of galactic proportions was, in a way, a human specialty. Time dragged on, each second a reminder of his precarious position. Viro had never been one for patience, and sitting still was about as appealing as a lobotomy. So he busied himself with the only thing he could do: think. He thought about the wormhole, about its role in the Cowrian network, and about the bizarre twists of fate that had landed him here. He thought about Kira and how she'd probably be tearing her hair out trying to figure out a way to get him back. And he thought about Tiala and how she'd seemed genuinely curious rather than outright hostile. It was a strange feeling, being seen as more than just a reckless human. For the first time in a long while, Viro felt a flicker of something that almost resembled hope. The door opened again, and this time it was High Priestess Zainara who entered, her expression a mix of irritation and something else, something Viro couldn't quite place. Her robes seemed to flow with authority, a stark contrast to his own disheveled appearance. Jackson Viro, she began, her voice carrying the weight of leadership and exasperation. The council has reached a decision. Great, let's hear it, Viro said, his tone breezy despite the impending verdict. Do I get a gold star for initiative? Zainara's expression didn't change, her gaze as steady and unyielding as the rest of her people. We have decided to keep you here until we can repair the damage to our network. Well, that's not ominous at all, Viro replied, trying to keep the sarcasm alive. And here I thought you'd just give me a slap on the wrist and send me on my merry way. You are an anomaly, as Tiala has surely informed you, Zainara continued, ignoring his flippancy. And we must determine whether you are a threat or an opportunity. Funny, I've always thought of myself as both, Viro said with a lopsided grin. So what's the plan, boss lady? Zainara's lips twitched, almost forming what could be mistaken for a smile. You will remain here and cooperate with Tiala to assess the extent of your talents. Ah, so I'm a guinea pig now, Viro quipped, unable to resist a cheeky jab. Do I get a wheel to run on? The High Priestess seemed unfazed, her expression as inscrutable as ever. Your situation is precarious, Jackson Viro. Tread carefully. Careful's my middle name, he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. Or was it trouble? I always get that mixed up. Zainara turned to leave, her robes whispering against the floor. You will be informed of your duties soon. I suggest you make the most of your time here. Well, it's not like I've got anywhere else to be, Viro called after her, watching as the door closed with an air of finality. Alone again, he mulled over the implications of his new role as the Cowrian's favorite science project. It wasn't exactly how he'd envisioned his latest adventure going, but then, things rarely went according to plan when Jackson Viro was involved. He'd learned long ago that the universe had a tendency to throw curveballs. His job was to catch them, or, failing that, to duck really fast. And despite the dire circumstances, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of excitement. After all, he was Jackson Viro. Trouble was his specialty, and chaos his calling card. Whatever happened next, he'd face it with all the ingenuity and irreverence that had gotten him this far. And maybe, just maybe, he'd surprise everyone, including himself. Jackson Viro sat in his holding cell, pondering how he could strike a deal with the universe to avoid being the human embodiment of Murphy's Law. The gray walls stared back, offering no solutions, just like the rest of the universe. "So, this is how it feels to be a museum exhibit," he muttered to himself, thinking of T-Ala and her anthropological interest. Preserved in an alien Tupperware for study. His mind wandered to Kira, likely in a state of controlled chaos, which was her default setting. If anyone could find a way to retrieve him, it was her. Until then, he was stuck playing politics with an alien hierarchy that had all the flexibility of reinforced steel. The door slid open, breaking his solitude with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. Rolkath, a Cowrian who wore his nervous energy like a second skin, entered the cell. The scientist had the look of someone perpetually worried about spilling coffee on a priceless artifact. "Viro," Rolkath began, his voice a little shaky, "I'm Rolkath. I need to speak with you, privately." Viro quirked an eyebrow. "Isn't this as private as it gets, or did you have something more clandestine in mind?" Rolkath glanced around as if the walls had suddenly grown ears and leaned in closer. "There are those of us who believe your unorthodox approach might have merit." "Ah, so you found the silver lining in the mushroom cloud, huh?" Viro remarked, amused. "What's next? Do I get a medal or a one-way ticket to the Cowrian version of Alcatraz?" Rolkath cracked a smile, though it looked like he hadn't exercised those muscles in quite some time. "Your actions, while disruptive, have shown us areas of our system that were vulnerable. Some believe this could be an opportunity to innovate. You're telling me there's a faction of you guys wanting to shake things up?" Viro leaned back, intrigued. "And they think I'm the guy to help do it. Bold move." "Not all are convinced," Rolkath admitted, a touch of worry creeping back into his voice. "High Priestess Zainara's circle remains cautious. But there's potential here. And let me guess," Viro said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, "you're the guy with a foot in both camps trying to keep your head from being the next item on the Council's agenda." Rolkath nodded, his antennae twitching slightly. "Exactly. We need to work together if we're to convince the Council to consider the benefits of your unique perspective. I'm not sure if you realize," Viro chuckled, "but typically my unique perspective is what gets me into these messes in the first place." "That's precisely why some of us value it," Rolkath replied. "Your unpredictability can be a strength." Viro thought about this, contemplating the possibility of turning his knack for chaos into an asset rather than a death sentence. "All right, Rolkath. You've got my attention. How do we play this?" The Cowrian scientist leaned in, his voice low. "T-Ala will be your point of contact. We'll arrange for you to participate in certain projects. Show the Council what you're capable of under guidance." "So, I'm still the guinea pig, just with a fancier wheel," Viro said with a smirk. "But at least it beats sitting here waiting for my fate to be decided by people who think adventure is a four-letter word." Rolkath's relief was palpable, nodding appreciatively. "Indeed. Be ready, Viro. We'll contact you soon." As Rolkath exited, Viro felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, a tiny ember of hope sparked by the idea that maybe, just maybe, his recklessness could be repurposed into something useful. Not long after, the door opened again and T-Ala entered, her expression a mix of curiosity and determination. "I've spoken with Rolkath," she said, getting straight to the point. "We need to prepare. Is this where I get my secret decoder ring and a crash course in espionage? Viro quipped. Tiala chuckled, an odd yet comforting sound. Not quite, but you'll be helping in our labs. We'll show the Council the potential of human adaptability. Great, Viro said, attempting an optimistic tone despite his natural cynicism. And here I thought my career as an accidental saboteur was peaking. Your skills are more useful than you know, Tiala assured him. The Council is set in its ways, but you can help us change that. Viro nodded, appreciating the vote of confidence. All right, what's the first step? Tiala gestured for him to follow her out of the cell. We're going to the lab. Rolkath has some ideas we think you'll be perfect for. Sounds like a plan, Viro said, stretching his arms as he exited the holding cell. Let's see if we can turn this misadventure into something productive. As they walked through the corridors of the Caurian mothership, Viro couldn't help but notice the meticulous design, every corner screaming efficiency and control. The very antithesis of what he represented, yet here he was, potentially their ace in the hole. Everything here is so sterile, he commented, glancing around. Makes me wonder if you Caurians have a sense of chaos at all. Tiala smiled, her antennae bobbing in agreement. We do, but it's usually hidden beneath layers of protocol and order. You've given us a new perspective. Glad to be of service, Viro replied. Usually, I'd charge for paradigm shifts, but given the circumstances, we can call this one a freebie. They arrived at the lab, a hive of activity compared to the subdued corridors. Rolkath was already there, coordinating a team of Caurians who were busily working on an array of monitors and alien tech that might as well have been pulled straight from a sci-fi fever dream. Welcome, Viro, Rolkath greeted him warmly, betraying a hint of excitement. We've got a project lined up that should highlight your capabilities. Please tell me it's not about rearranging furniture, Viro joked. I'm terrible at feng shui. Something far more interesting, Rolkath assured him, gesturing towards a console that displayed a three-dimensional schematic of a wormhole. We need you to help us understand how you managed to manipulate our network. Viro approached the console, examining the swirling diagram with interest. You mean how I accidentally stumbled into your wormhole like a drunk into a wedding cake? Precisely, Rolkath replied with a hint of admiration. Your actions exposed vulnerabilities that we need to address. And you think I can replicate that happy accident? Viro asked, raising an eyebrow. With guidance, Tiala interjected. Your unpredictability could reveal new insights. All right, Viro said, rolling up his sleeves. Let's see what kind of creative mischief we can conjure up. As he delved into the work, Viro found himself surprisingly at ease. His mind, usually racing with the speed of a hyperdrive, was focused, channeling his natural instincts into something constructive. It felt good to have a purpose beyond surviving the next scrape. Time flew by, and for once, Viro wasn't the center of a calamity. He was helping prevent one. The lab buzzed with a sense of shared purpose, a curious blend of order and chaos that felt strangely right. A few hours later, Rolkath called for a break, approaching Viro with a satisfied nod. You've exceeded our expectations, Viro. The Council will have to take notice now. Happy to help, Viro said, genuinely pleased. Even if it means putting my usual talent for destruction on hold. You've shown us the value of adaptability, Rolkath replied. The Council must see the benefit in your approach. As they wrapped up for the day, Viro felt a sense of accomplishment mingled with his usual irreverent self-assurance. He'd turned a potential death sentence into an opportunity, and that was no small feat for someone who often felt like the universe's designated troublemaker. The next few days followed a similar pattern, with Viro working alongside the Caurians, slowly shifting perceptions and demonstrating the potential of human ingenuity. It wasn't a walk in the park, but he thrived on the challenge. Conversations with Tiala became more frequent, her interest in human adaptability deepening with each discussion. You humans have a remarkable ability to improvise, she noted one day as they took a break from their work. It's something our species could learn from. Yeah, well, when you grow up in a galaxy that's one wrong turn away from blowing up in your face, you learn to adapt, Viro replied with a grin. Or you end up as space dust. And yet here you are, Tiala pointed out, her tone admiring. Here I am, Viro echoed, feeling a strange sense of belonging among these beings who'd once viewed him as little more than a nuisance. The day of reckoning came when the council convened again, this time with an agenda that included discussing Viro's potential contributions. The atmosphere was tense, the room filled with the kind of energy that could either spark innovation or ignite conflict. High Priestess Zainara presided over the meeting, her expression as unreadable as ever. "We have witnessed the capabilities of human adaptability firsthand," she stated, her gaze sweeping over the assembly. "It is time to determine if this potential can truly benefit our society." Rolkath presented their findings, showcasing how Viro's involvement had uncovered weaknesses and offered new strategies for their network. Tiala added her perspective, emphasizing the value of embracing unpredictability as a tool for growth. Viro remained silent, knowing his role was to let his actions speak louder than his words, a novel experience for someone who thrived on witty banter and sarcasm. After much deliberation, Zainara finally addressed the room. "We must weigh the risks against the potential benefits. Change is daunting, yet stagnation is not an option." The council members murmured among themselves, the tension palpable. Viro could almost see the gears of bureaucracy grinding in their minds, each member considering the implications of embracing a new way of thinking. "Jackson Viro," Zainara addressed him directly, her tone formal yet not unkind. "You have shown us that unpredictability has its merits. We will continue to work with you under careful supervision to further explore these possibilities." Viro couldn't help but grin, feeling a mix of relief and triumph. "Well, I'm glad to see we're on the same page, or at least in the same book," he quipped, earning a few chuckles from the audience. As the meeting adjourned, Viro felt an unfamiliar sensation, a sense of belonging. Maybe, just maybe, he was more than just a harbinger of chaos. In a world full of order, he'd found a niche that valued his particular brand of unpredictability. And who knows? Perhaps his escapades were just beginning, this time with a purpose that might just tip the balance in favor of something greater than himself. After all, he was Jackson Viro. Trouble was his specialty, but perhaps, just perhaps, he'd found a way to turn it into triumph. Jackson Viro was getting used to the idea of not dying in the immediate future, which was nice for a change. Sure, he'd swapped one kind of cell for another, but his new digs came with a side of hope, and hope was better than a swift kick to the existential groin. Plus, his new cell had gadgets, and gadgets were like shiny toys for someone with too much curiosity and a talent for chaos. Unfortunately, the good times were about as short-lived as a Cowrian smile. The council, predictably paranoid and about as flexible as reinforced steel, had decided that Viro was less of a human asset and more of a human liability. Their solution: terminate him and pretend none of this human nonsense had ever happened. In the Cowrian mothership, the corridors buzzed with the kind of quiet tension that usually signals impending doom. Rolkath, our nervous scientist friend, was pacing like a hyper-caffeinated squirt. "They're going to execute you, Viro," he blurted, as if delivering a weather report. "Wow, really?" Viro replied, leaning back in his chair. "And here I thought they were going to throw me a surprise birthday party." Rolkath threw him a look that could have curdled milk. "This is serious," Jackson shrugged. "Hey, don't get your tentacles in a twist. We all knew this was a possibility. I'm surprised it took them this long to figure out the squash the bug solution." "It's not just about you, Viro," Rolkath said, his voice a mixture of frustration and desperation. "If they recognize your potential as a danger rather than an asset, they might stifle any hope for progress, innovation, and change. So, what you're saying is, my execution is bad PR for the rebels." Viro smirked, his trademark blend of sarcasm laced with genuine concern. He might have been a walking disaster zone, but he wasn't entirely heartless. It's more than that. Enter Tiala, her presence a calming antidote to Rolkath's frantic energy. Your survival represents a chance for us to challenge the status quo. Ah, Viro said, gesturing around the lab. So, you're saying I'm the face of the revolution. I should charge for appearances. Tiala chuckled, but her expression remained serious. We need to get you out of here, Jackson. The council's decision is final and they won't wait long to execute it, pun fully intended. Great, Viro said, rising from his chair and stretching. What's the plan? I'm guessing it involves some daring last-minute escape that seems improbable at best. That's pretty much it, Rolkath admitted. We don't have much time, but we do have some allies within the ship who are willing to help. Why is it, Viro mused as they hustled him down the corridor, that every time someone says don't worry, we have a plan, what they actually mean is, we're going to make this up as we go along. Call it an exercise in adaptability, Tiala replied, steering him toward a service elevator. Let's just hope we can improvise as well as you humans do. As they descended into the bowels of the mothership, Viro couldn't help but feel a twinge of nostalgia for good old Earth. Sure, it was a mess of a planet, but it was his mess. And right now, even the sight of a rundown diner with questionable hygiene would have been a welcome comfort. They reached the lower decks, where the atmosphere was less sterile and more industrial. Pipes lined the walls, hissing steam at random intervals. The kind of place where a guy could lose his head, literally and figuratively. Jackson, over here, Rolkath whispered, leading him through a maze of ducts and catwalks that seemed designed to confuse anyone who wasn't born with a built-in GPS. Remind me again why we trust the guy whose anxiety attacks have anxiety attacks, Viro quipped, though he followed closely, appreciating the stakes. He's the only one with a working blueprint of this level, Tiala replied, winking. And besides, he's motivated by the idea of proving everyone wrong. Sounds like my kind of guy, Viro said, avoiding a low-hanging pipe with a practiced duck. They reached a nondescript hatch, and Rolkath fumbled with a series of codes before the door hissed open. Inside was an unassuming storage room, but the real prize lay beyond another door, one that required another code, this time provided by Tiala. We're heading into the maintenance tunnels, she explained. It's our best shot at avoiding detection. Maintenance tunnels, Viro repeated, a grin playing on his lips. I'm guessing the Calrians don't have a welcome to the escape room package, do they? Only if you count laser grids and sentry drones as part of the decor, Rolkath answered grimly. The tunnels were cramped, and the air was musty, a far cry from the pristine corridors of the upper levels. Viro wasn't claustrophobic, but even he was starting to feel like a canned sardine. You know, he muttered, I always imagined my end would be more dramatic, maybe a blaze of glory or a heroic last stand, not sneaking through air ducts like a space raccoon. Keep your voice down, Viro, Tiala warned, her antennae twitching with tension. We're not out yet. The trio continued their trek, navigating a labyrinth that seemed designed to test their resolve and patience. Several times they had to double back when faced with dead ends or security measures that were beyond their capability to disable. Why do I get the feeling this is all some elaborate way to get me to lose weight? Viro joked, squeezing through a particularly tight section. Less complaining, more squeezing, Rolkath shot back, his nerves showing through his attempt at a smile. Finally, they reached a junction where the tunnel widened into a larger service area. Tiala checked her datapad, confirming their position. This is it. The hangar bay is just beyond that door. And that's good news, right? Viro said, though his tone suggested he was ready for the catch. Well, the bad news is there's no way to bypass the security system, Rolkath admitted, glancing at the sealed door with a mix of frustration and determination. Of course there isn't, Viro sighed. There's always a catch. So what's Plan B? Plan B, Tiala said, her voice steady, is to create a diversion big enough to draw the guards away from the hangar. And how do we do that? Viro asked, already suspecting he wouldn't like the answer. By using the mothership's own systems against it, Rolkath said, smirking. We introduce a feedback loop into the sensor network. It'll convince the ship that there's a reactor leak. Won't that make them more likely to lock everything down? Viro asked. Not if they think the source is a faulty relay in the maintenance section, Tiala explained. It'll be treated as an isolated incident until they can confirm otherwise. All right, Viro said, taking a deep breath. Let's do it. Rolkath and Tiala set to work, tapping into a nearby console with a speed and precision that spoke to their desperation. Viro, meanwhile, kept an eye on the corridor, half expecting a squad of Kaurian guards to burst through and ruin their day. Got it, Rolkath announced, his fingers flying over the controls. The system's convinced there's a reactor leak. We should have about 10 minutes before they realize it's a false alarm. Then let's not waste any time, Viro urged, moving toward the door that led to the hangar bay. The door slid open, revealing the hangar, an expansive cavern filled with ships of varying sizes and purposes. The escape pod they needed was on the far side, tantalizingly close yet so far away. Let's hope this works, Tiala said, leading the charge across the deck. They moved swiftly, keeping low and using the parked ships as cover. The hangar, normally bustling with activity, was eerily quiet, a testament to the success of their diversion. Still, the clock was ticking and every second felt like an eternity. Almost there, Rolkath said, glancing nervously over his shoulder as they reached the pod. Viro quickly accessed the pod's systems, thankful for his years of tinkering with tech. He wasn't just a pretty face with a penchant for destruction, he had skills, damn it. All right, systems are go, he announced. Next stop anywhere but here. Not so fast, human, a voice boomed, freezing them in their tracks. A Kaurian officer, flanked by guards, emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. It seemed their diversion had only bought them so much time. Ah, crap, Viro muttered, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. I knew this was going too smoothly. Tiala and Rolkath exchanged a look, their expressions a mix of defiance and resignation. They'd come so far, yet it felt like they'd reached the end of the line. You will return to your quarters and this misadventure will be forgotten, the officer commanded, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. Viro met his gaze, defiance burning in his eyes. And if we refuse, then you will be executed for insubordination, the officer replied, his voice as cold as the void. For a moment, silence reigned, the weight of impending defeat pressing down on them. But Viro wasn't known for giving up, and he wasn't about to start now. With a quick, decisive movement, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a small device he'd snagged earlier, a portable EMP. You really shouldn't underestimate humans, he said, activating the device. The EMP discharged, sending a ripple of energy through the hangar. The guards' weapons and systems fizzled, momentarily disabled, giving Viro and his companions the opening they needed. Move! Viro shouted, and they scrambled into the pod, sealing the hatch behind them. Engage launch sequence, Tiala instructed, her voice a mix of urgency and excitement. Viro's fingers danced over the controls and the pod shuddered to life, lifting off the hangar floor with a satisfying roar. Next stop, freedom, he said, a grin spreading across his face. The pod shot out of the hangar, darting into space as alarms blared behind them. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd escaped the clutches of the Kaurian leadership. As they sped away, Viro leaned back in his seat, feeling a mix of relief and exhilaration. Sure, they were fugitives now, but at least they were free fugitives. Nice work, team, he said, glancing at Tiala and Rolkath. I think we deserve a drink after that. Tiala laughed, the tension of the past few hours melting away. Agreed, as long as it's not Kaurian ale. That stuff tastes like engine grease. Rolkath chuckled, the sound tinged with relief. I'll drink to that. As they flew into the unknown, Jackson Viro couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, a rare commodity in his line of work. Maybe, just maybe, they were on the verge of something greater. After all, chaos had a funny way of leading you exactly where you needed to be. The escape had been a minor miracle, the kind you don't see often unless you're in the business of divine intervention or Houdini-level escapes. Jackson Viro lounged back in his seat, the rush of adrenaline giving way to the throbbing headache of a hangover he hadn't earned yet. "So," he said, glancing at Tiala as she fiddled with the pod's navigation controls, "were you planning this from the start, or did I just get lucky?" Tiala gave him a sideways glance, her antennae twitching in what he assumed was amusement, or maybe it was exasperation. Hard to tell with aliens. "Let's call it a happy accident," she replied. Though I'm not sure Rolkath would agree. Rolkath, who was frantically trying to stabilize the pod's flight path, looked up, the worry lines on his face as deep as the Marianas Trench. "Happy isn't quite the word I'd use," he muttered. "We're not out of the woods yet, and your idea of destabilizing a wormhole seems like overkill, even for you, Viro." "Well, when life gives you lemons, you destabilize some interdimensional travel," Viro replied with a grin, tapping on the console to bring up a diagnostic. "Besides, chaos is kind of my thing. And it did create enough of a mess to get us this far." Tiala shook her head, half admiring, half exasperated. "You human, with your penchant for reckless abandon. You do realize the council will be on high alert now?" "Yeah, but they're also going to be too busy trying to figure out what the hell just happened with their precious wormhole to focus on us," Viro said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the universe. "It's all about misdirection. A classic magician's trick." "You're not a magician, Viro," Rolkath interjected, his nerves shot but his fingers steady on the controls. "You're a walking disaster area, and that wormhole is part of the network that holds their entire galactic empire together. You realize that, right?" "Sure, but what's an empire or two between friends?" Viro quipped. "Besides, they needed a wake-up call. They've been using that thing like it's a cosmic coffee machine, and someone had to spill the beans." "Spill the beans," Tiala echoed, the concept lost in translation. "Is that a human expression for something disastrous?" "It's a human thing," Viro replied with a dismissive wave. "Like a toddler with a paint set, you never know what you'll end up with, but it's bound to be messy." The pod shuddered as Rolkath adjusted their trajectory, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "Our window's closing. We need to find a place to land and regroup." "Speaking of places to land," Viro said, squinting at the display, "there's a derelict station nearby. Could be our best bet to lay low for a bit. Unless someone has a better idea." He looked between Tiala and Rolkath, who both seemed to be weighing the options with the same level of enthusiasm one might have for an unplanned dental visit. Tiala nodded, making a decision. "Let's head there. It's risky, but it's not like we have a lot of options. Besides, the council will be too preoccupied with the wormhole for a while." "All right then, it's settled," Rolkath said, punching in the coordinates. "And Viro, try not to press any more buttons until we're safely docked, okay?" "No promises," Viro grinned. "But I'll do my best." As they approached the derelict station, an ancient, rusting hulk drifting in space like a forgotten relic, Viro couldn't help but think of it as home. Not in the literal sense, but in the way that places no one wanted to be seen to welcome him with open arms. They docked with minimal fuss, a minor miracle considering the state of the station. The docking bay was depressurized and barely lit, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. "Home sweet home," Viro said as the pod's hatch opened with a reluctant hiss. The station itself was a graveyard of forgotten technology, walls lined with cobwebs of circuitry and control panels that had seen more neglect than use. If this station had a spirit, it would have been that of a curmudgeonly old janitor, grumbling about the kids these days and their fancy new toys. Viro stepped out first, scanning the area for any signs of life, hostile or otherwise. "Looks like we have the place to ourselves," he said, gesturing for the others to follow. "Let's hope it stays that way," Rolkath said, though his tone suggested he wasn't counting on it. The trio made their way through the station, Viro leading the way with the cocky confidence of someone who'd always found trouble and managed to slip away before it caught him. They entered what appeared to have once been a control room, now a tomb of dead monitors and shattered dreams. "At least it's quiet," Tiala remarked, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "Quiet's good," Viro agreed, though he knew better than to trust it. "Quiet means no one's shooting at us, yet." "Speaking of shooting," Rolkath said, checking a panel on the wall, "there's an armory on this station. If we're going to make a stand, we should arm ourselves." "Now you're speaking my language," Viro said, a mischievous gleam in his eye. "Let's go play dress-up." The armory was a treasure trove of outdated weaponry, the kind that seemed to belong more in a museum than an active combat scenario. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and right now, Viro was happy to take what he could get. "Not exactly top of the line," Tiala said, examining a blaster that looked like it had seen more action than a veteran soldier's memoir. "But it'll do," Viro replied, slinging a rifle over his shoulder. "And hey, if worse comes to worst, we can always use them as clubs." They gathered what they could carry, Rolkath taking a few moments to familiarize himself with a weapon that hadn't been in vogue for decades. "Let's hope this isn't a repeat of the maintenance tunnels," he said, his anxiety peeking through his calm facade. "Don't worry," Viro said, grinning. "I'm sure we'll find new ways to mess things up." "That's not exactly comforting," Tiala muttered, though there was a hint of amusement in her voice. As they made their way back to the control room, Viro couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not by the Cowrians, no, they had bigger fish to fry, but by something else. The station had an eerie presence, the kind of place where shadows seem to have minds of their own. "Anyone else feel like we're not alone?" Viro asked, glancing around the dimly lit corridors. "It's an old station," Rolkath said, though he too seemed uneasy. "Probably just your imagination. Or maybe it's the ghosts of bad decisions past," Viro joked, though his tone was serious. They reached the control room again, settling in for what they hoped would be a quiet wait. The monitors were dead, but Rolkath and Tiala worked to bring at least some of them back online, hoping for a way to monitor the situation outside. Tiala managed to power up a display, static giving way to a grainy image of the surrounding space. "There," she said, relief in her voice. "We can at least see if anyone's approaching. Not bad for a derelict station," Viro said, watching the image flicker and stabilize. "Now we just sit tight and wait for the right moment to make our next move." "Which will be what exactly?" Rolkath asked, casting a wary eye on Viro. "We can't just sit here forever." "We won't," Viro replied, leaning against the console with a wry grin. "We're going to use this place to our advantage. Remember how I said chaos is my thing? Well, it's time to make some more." "You're going to destabilize something else, aren't you?" Tiala said, her tone equal parts impressed and exasperated. "Of course," Viro replied, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "But this time we're going to be a bit more creative." Rolkath and Tiala exchanged a look, the kind that said more than words ever could. Viro's recklessness had gotten them this far, but it was a dance on the edge of disaster. And yet, as much as they might have questioned his methods, there was a certain thrill in riding the wave of chaos he seemed to generate. Viro turned back to the displays, his mind racing with possibilities. The derelict station was a gold mine of potential, each broken panel and forgotten circuit a piece of a puzzle only he could see. It was time to put his plan into action, a plan so crazy it might just work. "All right, let's get to work," Viro said, pushing off the console and gesturing for the others to follow. "Time to give the Cowrians something to really worry about." "And what exactly are we going to do?" Rolkath asked, though there was a glint of anticipation in his eyes. "We're going to turn this station into the biggest distraction the galaxy's ever seen," Viro replied, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's see how they like a little chaos with their order." With that, they set to work, a ragtag team of misfits in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. If Jackson Viro had his way, things were about to get interesting, Very interesting indeed. The derelict station hummed with the usual indifference of a place that hadn't seen visitors in, well, longer than Viro had been alive. The kind of place that could use a good cleaning, a lick of paint, and maybe an exorcism. But it was perfect for what he had in mind. Rolkath, ever the warrior, was already pacing. I can't believe we're actually doing this. Do you have any idea what kind of heat we're going to bring down if this doesn't work? Heat. Rolkath, the Cowrians already think we're a bunch of cosmic mosquitoes buzzing around their ears. Anything we do now is just adding a little flavor to their otherwise boring lives, Viro said, fiddling with a piece of ancient tech that looked like it had once been part of a microwave, or a bomb. Hard to tell. Tiala, leaning against a wall with the practiced boredom of someone who had seen it all, chimed in. So, what exactly is the plan, Jackson? Because while I enjoy a good disaster as much as the next alien, I'd prefer not to die in a forgotten corner of the galaxy. Viro grinned. It wasn't a reassuring grin by any means, more the kind you see on someone about to pull a particularly mean prank. We're going to give the Cowrians a show they'll never forget. And all it takes is a little creative rewiring. And by creative rewiring you mean, Rolkath asked, brow furrowing in concern. I mean, we're going to use the station's systems to mess with their surveillance. Think of it as giving their sensors a really bad LSD trip. There was a moment of silence as Tiala and Rolkath processed this. That's insane, Tiala said, shaking her head with a kind of reluctant admiration. But it might just work. That's the spirit, Viro said, clapping her on the shoulder. Now let's get to it before the Cowrians realize their wormhole is acting more like a revolving door for chaos. The control room buzzed with activity as the trio set to work. Viro, in his element, had a pile of cables and circuit boards spread out like a demented engineer's jigsaw puzzle. Rolkath, though still jittery, was focused on the task, his fingers flying over a terminal as he attempted to interface with the ancient systems. So, any idea what we're looking at here? Rolkath asked, peering over Viro's shoulder at the tangle of wires. Think of it as an art installation, Viro said, clearly enjoying himself. We're going to paint the Cowrians a picture with their own tech, a picture of utter chaos. And how exactly do we avoid blowing ourselves up in the process? Tiala asked, eyes narrowed as she examined a particularly unstable-looking capacitor. Who says we're going to blow up? I mean, sure, there's a chance, but where's the fun without a little risk? Viro replied, grinning like a madman. Spoken like someone who's never had to put themselves back together after an explosion, Rolkath muttered, though he couldn't help but be drawn in by the infectious energy of the human. As Viro pieced together his masterpiece of misdirection, Tiala monitored the station's sensors, keeping an eye out for any approaching ships. So far, so good. No sign of the Cowrians catching on yet. That's because they're too busy playing whodunit with their wormhole, Viro said. By the time they figure out we're here, we'll be long gone. Hopefully. Hopefully, Rolkath asked, raising an eyebrow. Life's no fun without a little uncertainty, Viro replied, his tone light but his eyes serious. Besides, isn't it nice to be unpredictable for once? Unpredictable isn't exactly what I'd call it, Tiala said, her voice tinged with wry amusement. More like recklessly insane. Semantics, Viro said with a shrug. All right, let's fire this baby up and see what happens. With a flip of a switch and a prayer to whatever gods looked after fools and madmen, Viro activated his contraption. The station's lights flickered, the screens danced with static, and the system roared to life with all the grace of a drunken walrus. Is it working? Rolkath asked, as the control room became a cacophony of beeps and static. Depends on your definition of working, Viro said, eyes glued to the main screen. But yeah, I'd say we're giving them something to think about. Outside, the derelict station hummed with energy, projecting a chaotic signal that scrambled Cowrian sensors like eggs in a blender. The wormhole flickered, its stable form disrupted by the station's interference. Look at them, Tiala said, a hint of wonder in her voice as she watched the feed. They're scrambling to figure out what's happening. Like ants at a picnic, Viro added, satisfaction dripping from his words. This is how you level the playing field. And what do we do now? Rolkath asked, his anxiety slowly giving way to the thrill of their daring plan. Now, Viro said, leaning back with a contented sigh. Now we sit back and enjoy the fireworks. But the universe, much like Viro, had a thing for surprises, and as it turned out, not all of them were good ones. The station shuddered, the lights dimming as something massive dropped out of the wormhole, a Cowrian mothership, bristling with weapons and bad intentions. Well, that's not ideal, Tiala said, understatement thick in her voice. Idea, let's not die, Rolkath suggested, panic creeping back into his tone. Seconded, Viro said, rising to his feet with renewed determination. All right, plan B, we make nice. Make nice? Tiala repeated, incredulity painted across her face. With the people who want to kill us. Why not? Viro said, a mischievous glint in his eye. Diplomacy's just a fancy word for talking your way out of getting shot. Besides, we have the upper hand now. They're not going to negotiate with someone who's been messing with their empire, Rolkath said, though doubt was creeping into his voice. Maybe not, Viro admitted. But they will listen to someone who saved their precious wormhole from total meltdown. And how do you propose we do that? Tiala asked, skepticism evident. Simple, Viro said with a grin. We give them an offer they can't refuse. We stabilize the wormhole, and in return they let us walk. As the mothership loomed closer, the trio readied themselves for what could either be their finest Ior or their last stand. Viro tapped a comm panel, opening a channel to the Cowrians. Attention, Cowrian mothership, he said, doing his best to sound like he wasn't terrified. This is Jackson Viro, the guy currently preventing your wormhole from collapsing. We need to talk. For a moment, there was only static in response, a silence that felt heavier than the void. And then a voice crackled through, the unmistakable tone of High Priestess Zainara. Jackson Viro, she said, her voice icy enough to freeze nitrogen. You have caused considerable disruption. Why should we not simply destroy you? Because if you do, your precious wormhole goes kaput, Viro said, trying to sound like he had a plan beyond wing it. I've rigged this station to keep it stable. We can help each other here. There was a pause, and Viro could almost hear the gears turning in Zainara's mind. The Cowrians weren't known for their flexibility, but maybe, just maybe, they'd see reason. You propose a truce? Zainara asked, her tone wary. A temporary one, Viro said, choosing his words carefully. We stabilize the wormhole together and we walk away. No strings attached. You have much to answer for, Zainara replied, the weight of centuries of bureaucracy in her voice. And I will, Viro said. But first, let's make sure your empire doesn't fall apart. The silence stretched on as if the universe itself held its breath. Then slowly a reply came. Very well, Zainara said, her tone grudging. A temporary truce. But know this, Jackson Viro, should you betray us, there will be nowhere in the galaxy you can hide. Understood, Viro said, relief flooding through him. Now let's get to work. The next few Iors were a blur of activity, Viro and his companions working alongside the Cowrians in a tense alliance. The wormhole, once a symbol of Cowrian dominance, now became a shared responsibility, a fragile bridge between two worlds that had always seemed irreconcilable. As the last of the repairs were made, the wormhole stabilized, its swirling depths returning to their normal, non-explosive state. There, Viro said, stepping back with a satisfied nod. Good as new. Better, Tiala corrected, a rare smile on her face. And without the explosions. For once, Rolkath added, though he couldn't hide his own relief. The comm panel crackled to life, Zainara's voice cutting through the static. The wormhole is stable. You have fulfilled your part of the agreement, Jackson Viro. And now we leave, Viro said, not bothering to hide his eagerness to be gone. Indeed, Zainara replied, her tone still cool but less hostile. Our paths may cross again, human. Until then, may your mischief find other targets. "Here's hoping," Viro replied, cutting the connection. The trio made their way back to the pod, the weight of what they'd accomplished settling in. Against all odds, they'd pulled off the impossible. For now, at least, they had a reprieve. "Well, that was something," Rolkath said as they strapped in, the pod's engines humming to life. "An understatement," Tiala said, shaking her head with a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. "Just another day in the life of Jackson Viro," Viro said, grinning as they launched away from the station, leaving behind their unlikely alliance and a wormhole that would live to see another sunrise. As they drifted into the vastness of space, Viro couldn't help but chuckle. Chaos, it seemed, had its benefits. And who knew what adventures tomorrow would bring? For now, he was content to ride the wave, mischievous and irreverent, a human wild card in a galaxy that had never quite known what to do with him. And really, wasn't that the best way to be? As the pod drifted away from the derelict station, Jackson Viro leaned back in his seat, a victorious grin plastered across his face. The station was now a speck in the distance, like a forgotten piece of space debris, or maybe a crumpled-up love letter from the universe that he just casually tossed away. Either way, he felt good. They'd survived, and for once, his brand of chaos had saved the day. "Hero of the Ior," Tiala said, shooting him a sideways glance. "Who'd have thought? Not me, that's for sure," Rolkath muttered, still looking like someone had told him the universe was going to be painted neon pink. "Don't get too comfortable," Viro said, still riding the high. "We're not out of this mess completely." High Priestess Zainara might have agreed to a truce, but I doubt she's putting up a statue of me anytime soon. "More likely a dartboard," Tiala suggested, her dry humor as sharp as ever. "Hey, at least they'd be aiming for my face and not my back," Viro replied, shrugging. "It's a start." The three of them lapsed into a comfortable silence, the pod cruising smoothly through the void. The Calrian mothership was still visible on their monitors, hanging in space like a big, angry iceberg. Viro wondered if they were still glaring at the screens, trying to figure out how a human, a doubter, and a warrior had outsmarted them. Not that it was necessarily hard. Calrians had the flexibility of an iron rod. "You think they'll ever look at that wormhole the same way again?" Rolkath asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Probably not," Viro said, unable to keep the smugness out of his voice. "They've been using it as their safety net for too long. Now they know it's not infallible, all thanks to a little human ingenuity. And insanity," Tiala added, arching an eyebrow. "Potato, tomato," Viro said with a grin. "But maybe now they'll start questioning their dependence on it. Who knows, maybe we've opened their eyes. Or just given them a reason to develop anti-human defenses," Rolkath said, though there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Either way, we made our mark," Viro said, leaning back further and folding his arms behind his head. "And isn't that what life's all about? Making your mark, even if it's a scorch mark on someone else's carefully polished floor. You've certainly left enough of those," Tiala said, shaking her head with a smirk. The pod's radio crackled to life, interrupting their banter. Viro reached over and flipped a switch, clearing the static. "Attention, Jackson Viro," came a voice over the comms. It was one of the Calrian subordinates, and they sounded about as enthusiastic as a depressed android. "You are hereby granted passage out of Calrian space, but be warned. Your presence will not be tolerated should you return without invitation." Viro couldn't help but chuckle. "Guess I'm not on their Christmas card list this year. Or any year," Tiala said, grinning. "Fair enough," Viro replied, tapping the comms panel. "Copy that Calrian command. We'll be sure to leave your space the way we found it, except, with slightly less structural integrity." There was a pause, the kind of silence that suggested the Calrian on the other end was gritting their teeth. "Do not test our patience, human." "Wouldn't dream of it," Viro said, winking at his companions as he cut the connection. As they continued their journey away from the Calrian territory, the conversation turned to future plans. They didn't have much in the way of a destination, just the open expanse of space and whatever adventures it might hold. "So, "What's next for the galaxy's favorite troublemakers?" Tiala asked, tapping absently at the pod's navigation controls. "How about anywhere that's not here?" Rolkath suggested, sounding like he was already planning every possible route that led away from Cowrian eyes. "Sounds good to me," Viro said, stretching. "I've had enough of being intergalactic most wanted for one day." "Just one day," Tiala teased. "All right, 1 week," Viro conceded. "But only because being a fugitive starts to get boring after a while." "Boring, huh?" Rolkath said with a chuckle. "I thought you thrived on chaos." "I do," Viro said, "but even chaos has to take a breather once in a while. Recharge, regroup, and maybe plan the next grand disaster." "Speaking of which," Tiala said, her tone shifting to something more serious, "what's your plan for when the Cowrians come knocking again?" Viro shrugged, brushing off the concern. "Same thing I always do, improvise and hope for the best." "You can't keep flying by the seat of your pants forever," Rolkath said, though there was a hint of admiration in his voice. "Eventually it's going to catch up to you." "Yeah, but until then I'm going to enjoy the ride," Viro said, looking out at the endless stars. "Besides, unpredictability is a human's best friend, keeps the universe on its toes, or on edge," Tiala corrected, though she was smiling. "Potato, tomato," Viro repeated, waving a hand dismissively. As the pod glided further into uncharted space, the trio settled into a rhythm, the hum of the engines a comforting backdrop to the chatter. They were a mismatched crew, a human with a penchant for chaos, a Cowrian anthropologist with a taste for the unknown, and a warrior who couldn't help but be drawn into the madness. It was the kind of oddball team-up that usually ended in disaster, but somehow they'd made it work. "Think we'll ever go back to normal?" Rolkath asked, his voice thoughtful. "Normal's overrated," Viro said, shaking his head. "Besides, what's normal for us? Running from disaster to disaster, laughing in the face of danger, and causing a few diplomatic incidents along the way. Sounds like a pretty good gig to me." "Maybe for you," Tiala said, rolling her eyes. "Normal for me was a nice, quiet life of study and research. And look at you now," Viro said, gesturing around the pod. "Out here in the thick of it, living the dream." "If by dream you mean constant state of peril, then sure," she replied with a smirk. "Exactly," Viro said, grinning. "We're making history one calamity at a time." "Or rewriting it," Rolkath added, though he seemed to be warming to the idea. As they journeyed further into the unknown, Viro's thoughts drifted to the Cowrians and their precious wormhole. He wondered how they'd spin this latest fiasco, how they'd explain away the human element that had thrown their carefully balanced universe into disarray. It was a funny thought, a single human causing so much trouble. "Do you think they'll ever see us as anything other than a threat?" Rolkath asked, voicing the thought that had been nagging at Viro's mind. "Probably not," Viro said with a shrug. "But that's their problem, not ours. Let them worry about the unpredictable humans. We'll just keep doing what we do best." "Causing chaos?" Tiala asked. "Living," Viro corrected. "And maybe causing a little chaos along the way." "More than a little," Rolkath said, chuckling. The stars stretched out before them, a vast expanse of possibilities waiting to be explored. Viro felt a thrill of anticipation, the kind that only came at the start of something new and exciting. The galaxy was still out there, full of wonders and dangers, and ready for someone like him to shake things up. "Well, here's to the next adventure," Viro said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast. "May it be as unpredictable as the last," Tiala said, joining in. "And hopefully less life-threatening," Rolkath added, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "Cheers to that," Viro said, feeling a sense of camaraderie with his unlikely companions. As the pod sailed through the stars, Viro couldn't help but smile. The universe was vast and strange, but with friends like these by his side, he knew he'd never be bored. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a little order in the chaos they created. Or, at the very least, a good story to tell. So, with a final glance back at the fading Cowrian mothership, Jackson Viro and his crew set their course for the unknown. The galaxy was theirs to explore, to disrupt, and to leave their mark on. And really, wasn't that the best way to be? As they sped forward, Viro felt a sense of freedom, of possibility. He was a human in a galaxy that didn't quite know what to do with him, a wild card in a game that was always changing, always unpredictable. It was a role he embraced with open arms, a challenge he was more than willing to face. After all, in a universe that thrived on order and predictability, someone had to shake things up, and who better than him? With that thought, Viro leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the gentle hum of the engines lull him into a rare moment of peace. For now, at least, the chaos could wait. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow was a new adventure.